And with that being said, we're going to move on to the other side of things with Marvel and the latest episode of the Disney Plus original series, Agatha All Along. Last week, we got the first 2 episodes of this 9 episodes, I believe, limited series. And now we have episode 3, which is entitled Through Many Miles of Tricks and Trials. A lot of character introductions in those first 2 episodes, and certainly kind of the building of what appears to be the A plot of the show in terms of what this coven of witches is going to be doing for probably the vast majority of the show and sort of what their motivations are. But now we have episode 3. Some very, very key and pivotal things went down. Before we dive into the spoilers and all the nitty gritty details of this week's episode, we're just going to start off with general big picture thoughts. So what did you think about this latest episode of Agatha All Along?
I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. They did some things here that were just different than I think that we've seen from any of the a lot of other MCU TV shows, and this is a really cool one location episode with the Coven of Witches, and I like being able to focus on our characters in the way that we did, and I liked I think just going through this episode is about the first trial of these witches, and so I just like just being able to sit with this and to see how they're going to go through all of this and see how, I guess, again, how witchy this show can be. But it had all of the things that I was hoping for in the show. It was still funny, but also it got really dark this episode got super dark, and I think surprised to see, I think, the lengths that they went to show us how dark it could be, and what consequences look like, and what this show might mean. And so I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but I also loved how they showed us how dangerous this show can and might be. So yeah, I liked it. I like how intimate it was, and so yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good episode. I think that we have now sort of settled into the idea that this is an adventure show. They have to go on a quest. A quest is a very, very typical trope in storytelling. We have to go from point A to point B. We have to go the lengths of whatever this distance and this journey requires of us, because we have to achieve an objective. And I think that for this show, because we're dealing with witches and the supernatural and possibly different worlds and all sorts of stuff, that's the perfect device and trope to use for this show, because we can go to all sorts of locations, all sorts of weird stuff can happen along the way, and probably you're going to lose people along that journey as well. That's also like another typical trope that we see, and I think that certainly came to pass in this episode. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm feeling what we're going for here, and I like that. Not only do we have a sense of just the direction and the tone of it already, especially with those first 2 episodes, but we also feel like we do have a purpose and there's forward momentum. And I think that this episode did a good job at keeping that momentum going. I think that with these Disney Plus Marvel shows, the true test of their quality comes around this midway point, which we're about to enter into. Episodes 4 and 5 are going to be pivotal, because they can either continue down with something that's working, or they can make a pretty bold pivot, and that pivot may either work or it might not work. I don't know. We'll see when we get to episodes 4 and 5. But so far, so good for me. So I like this episode. But with all of that out the way, let's dive into spoilers, talk about the details. If you've not seen the latest episode of Agatha All Along, go watch it and then come back and finish the rest of this conversation. And the first place that I just want to start off with is with the road itself. That's really where episode 2 ended, with this coven of witches that was newly formed by Agatha, who were going to go on this journey along the witches' road to retrieve their powers. And now we kind of have a sense of, truly how dangerous this road is. It's not lilies and sunflowers. It's very, very dangerous, and you have to be quite careful of what you do or what you don't even do along the road. And one of the first things that we see is kind of the establishing of the rules, like, hey, don't ever leave the road, because if you leave the road, that's your ass. And we saw that in like the first opening minutes with Sarah's character, because she strays along from the path of the road, and it looks like she's being sunk, down in the road. Like her hands almost get trapped, and the road, or at least the outskirts of the road, are starting to consume her entirely before she's able to escape. And that's when Agatha's like, oh yeah, you can't do that. You can't ever stray from the road. How did you feel about just starting to see that stuff really unfold here? A lot more happened, of course, once they arrive at the house, but we're starting to, again, kind of get a true sense of just like, this is all really, really dangerous stuff. And they only have but so much knowledge, right? Like you kind of know these things, you know what the song says, you know what the chants say, but it's another thing to actually put it into practice and have to walk this, and have to live with the pressure. Like, yeah, okay, I don't have my powers right now, so the things that could get me out of this particular situation, they're not going to work anymore. So, how did you feel about just the establishing of this new world along the Witch's Road?
Yeah, show us how dangerous this stuff is up front. And I like how early they did it, particularly with Mrs. Hart, who one, she barely don't even know the song. So of course she's gonna veer off from the road if she don't know the lyrics to the song that say stay on the road. But also, again, just seeing I think how scary and how dangerous witchy anything can be. And I think that's one of the most interesting things I've ever learned, I think, about magic in a lot of these worlds is like there's always give and take. Like a lot of these witches have probably sacrificed something to become a witch, or you sacrifice something to make potions, or you sacrifice something to make spells. And I love again them establishing like the world around them is going to be like that. It's going to be sacrificial if you don't listen, if you don't do the right things, if you don't do, if you don't move on the path correctly, then you're going to wind up and end up your hands getting sucked off. You know what I'm saying? Or you're going to end up in the ground. I also thought it was interesting that Mrs. Hart, that does happen to her, but she's the quote unquote supposed to be like the Earth Witch here. I was wondering if that had like some correlation. I was thinking that like, you're supposed to be like the Earth Witch. I wonder if you getting sucked into the ground and this grassy thing was on purpose. But man, I'm just happy that they're like, y'all, this whole thing is dangerous. Give us something to be afraid for these characters, and I think they did a good job of that.
There probably, I would imagine, is some correlation. The very thing that you're supposed to be an expert at can consume you and ultimately be your demise. I think that probably is some, I guess, a twisted sense of poetic justice if that's the way
Mm-hmm.
that a character is supposed to go out. But yeah, this was all good stuff. It's just to remind you, like, hey, this is not safe. This is not a safe space here, y'all. This is a very, very, very terrible stuff that can happen to you if you don't pay attention, if you're not really sharp and keen and observative, of just everything around you. This is not necessarily even the Wizard of Oz, where, pretty much the
Mm-hmm.
Yellow Brick Road was a pretty peaceful place. Everything was all good along the Yellow Brick Road until Dorothy
Yeah.
ran into, the lion and the scarecrow and the Tin Man. But for the most part here, it's like every time they turn a corner, something else happens. Every time they
Mm-hmm.
they walk down a new path, something else is happening. It's really never safe for them. And so, yeah, just continue to reinforce that sense of danger and just the spookiness and the creepiness that this world can really thrust upon them. I liked all of that stuff. Um, I think probably the most key thing that we found out in this episode is something that Jen ultimately reveals to Teen, who we still don't know his name yet because we ultimately learned that a sigil is basically preventing him from revealing and learning his identity. But Jen, she has a private conversation with him, and she's warning him like, "Hey, you probably shouldn't really trust Agatha. And Agatha is not really doing herself any favors in the show. She's not
Mm-hmm.
treating anybody really with any respect. She's very dismissive. She's kind of shooing people along, like she's not participating in the actual spells. So she's not really helping her case here. But Jen reinforces that to Teen, and she's like, "Hey, by the way, this woman traded her own child to get possession of the Darkhold." Big,
Crazy.
big bomb that they dropped there. Something that we did not know. And when you hear it, it's like, excuse me, what did she do? Why would she do something like that?
Yeah.
And I think when you hear it, it puts a question in your head like, oh, she didn't really do that, did she? But ultimately, we kind of get the confirmation later in the episode, like, no, she did that shit for sure. Once
She
she has
definitely did
the
that shit.
the bad vision, but what did you think about that? That's a crazy thing to do. We don't really know why that happened. We know that it obviously still haunts Agatha as well. But
Mm-hmm.
what did you think about that huge revelation? Because that can certainly color your perception of that character and make you think differently, a lot differently about her than we already did.
Yeah, I mean, we always thought she was a villain and an evil character, but trading your son for magic is like another level of wait a second, what? Like, what did you do and why did you do it? And now, what I love about that though is of course, it makes Agatha like that much more like, wow, you are not a great person, but also it makes you so much more interested on the why. And now, these next couple episodes, all of us are going to be like, okay, why? Like, part of me is watching the next episode because I'm trying to figure out why the hell she did that. And I think that was a really good tool for us to get interested to figure out what's going on here, because that is, yeah, that's nuts. You don't really, even again, a lot of the things we see, we just talk about sacrifices. People ain't out here sacrificing their kids, you know what I'm saying? Like they might give up something else, but your child is a whole nother ball game. And it did make me think of the flashback in WandaVision where although Salem 7 was mad at her, I would be mad at her too. If I'm part of a coven, you sold your son to do what? Yeah, no, we need to talk about this. You might not need to be part of this coven anymore. So I wonder if that might be part of that, or I don't know. We'll have to figure out. But I love how it perked up my ears and made me even more interested in the character.
Yeah, and what was interesting for me in that moment, because it definitely gave me pause. It reminded me like, oh yeah, this is a show about a villain. Because I think it's easy to forget when you're seeing this crazy witchy stuff happen, and it feels like it's like, oh, what a fun adventure. It's scary, but it's still fun, and it's a coven of witches. Like all of that stuff can kind of allow you to forget that this is not necessarily a great person that we're following here as the lead. This was
Mm-hmm.
a great way to just drop in a reminder like, yeah, she's not to be trusted because she's done something that nobody would think imaginable to do. And it reminded me of some of the parallels I think that exist between her and Wanda as a character, just
Mm-hmm.
because, a lot of what the second half of WandaVision was about, what was about her children and the protection of her children and the idea that she would do anything. And that all led to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But
Yeah.
we did in fact see at the end of WandaVision when Agatha gave up the ruse and revealed that she was pulling the strings the entire time, she was willing to sacrifice Wanda's children at the drop of a dime, knowing how powerful Wanda was, knowing how much of a
Yeah.
threat she was, knowing like, hey, you have like probably thousands of people, operating under this fake sitcom. You have them basically kidnapped in this whole new reality that you've created.
Mm-hmm.
Something has to be done here. But she was going to do something probably very, very terrible herself with the children of Wanda in order to I guess overcome her in that moment. And so
Yeah.
we cannot forget who we're dealing with here. Again, the small subtle things that she'll do here and there to let you know she's kind of an asshole, she's kind of a prick. That's a nice reminder, but you need something that carries a lot more gravity and weight. And sacrificing a child, that weighs a lot. That certainly weighs a
Yeah.
lot.
Gotta do
Um,
it.
we also somehow, some way, we've ended up kind of full circle here. Jen name drops Mephisto in this
Here we are.
episode.
Here
We
we
have
are.
we finally
She said
arrived
it.
at the moment where Mephisto's name has been uttered in the MCU.
Yeah.
Um, I don't really know what to say about it because it doesn't say a ton. It just name
Yeah.
drops them and we just kind of move on here. But from a fan standpoint, from an audience standpoint, we know that Mephisto has literally been speculated about since the creation of Marvel
Mm-hmm.
Television, since the creation of these series, all the way back to WandaVision. So much so that it became a gag pretty much in every show, unrelated or not. Mephisto is the cause. Oh yeah, who's behind the government, not wanting Sam to be Captain America? It's probably Mephisto, y'all.
Gotta be
Which makes
Mephisto.
no sense, but we just ran with it, right?
Yeah.
How does it feel to finally hear his name in the MCU? And I guess we haven't heard anything about this in a while, but
Mm-hmm.
there were rumors, probably over a year ago at this point that Sacha Baron Cohen, was going to play Mephisto. I don't know if it's in this show. Maybe he does pop up. Maybe we do see him because they referenced him. But how do you feel about that? Now this is a true and actual character that has some sort of presence in the MCU because they wouldn't say his name otherwise if he did not.
Yeah. There's even part of the rumor that says he even might be in like Ironheart. I was like, what? Why would he be in Ironheart? It doesn't make any sense. But like, I don't know. I don't know. It's weird. But man, what a what a journey to get to the final name drop of Mephisto. All I'll really say is like there there's a path here where there's just like, let's just go ahead and put him in. Out of all the projects we've done, this is the one that makes sense. Let's just go ahead and throw his name in here. If we use it, we use it. If we don't, we don't. Like part of me even does want to see Mephisto just because like we don't have to speculate about anything no more. Like let's just let him be concrete. He's in this thing, and that's it. We don't have to talk about him in Thunderbolts. We don't have to talk about him in Captain America. Let's just leave him in this switchy realm, and I would be kind of okay with that. But I think part of me is like, okay, this is where he belongs, and if he does pop up, maybe it'll make sense. Maybe they talk about it now and never talk about it ever again. I'm kind of also okay with that as long as we understand that he does not need to have any power in any of the rest of the MCU. And so I'm cool with both of those options. Sacha Baron Cohen is Mephisto. I think what the thing is about Mephisto is he is a cool character. That's the thing that kind of makes you mad, is like he is a cool character. There's a lot that you can do with him. It's crazy, actually, what he could actually mean to the MCU if done correctly. And so we'll have to see what they do. But I think there's a couple ways they can go with it. I just hope they pick the right way.
First of all, I'll just make it clear I am not dying to see Mephisto. He could pop up, he cannot pop up. It is what it is at this point. Like,
Exactly.
I won't feel a way about it at all, especially considering that we have just like ran his name in the ground for all these years. But I also think that this is one, he probably has a very likely chance of popping up in the show because this does make the most sense. But it also just feels like they're in on the gag. They know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
They know that everybody has been talking about Mephisto for years now, and so I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Schaefer was just like, yeah, let's just toss that in there because like we know people are going to
Mm-hmm.
speculate about it. We know that it's going to come up once again, and it's supernatural. But let's just toss it in. Whether or not we address it, we'll see. Before the series ends, but this would be the place to do it. It would be the place to actually make it happen. And yeah, Ironheart is question mark, don't know. But if he were to start here and then work his way into Ironheart somehow, all
Mm-hmm.
right, that I guess that could work. But again, it's just such a it's a cool character, but it's also an out there character. So
Yeah.
to just drop him in Ironheart would be very jarring, but to drop him
Be
here
like,
first
whoa.
and then like see him and then
Yeah.
ultimately if he has a presence in Ironheart, that feels like a little bit more of a natural progression. But I don't know. I don't know what the plans are. We'll ultimately have to see. But ultimately, this all leads to I think one of the first trials that all the witches have to go through. They all drink this wine. Turns out it's poison. Their faces turn crazy. It looks like they've had 7 operations and surgeries and tons of Botox in their
that
face.
that that hitch. That
Yeah,
hitch.
that hitch, that Will Smith affected
Yeah,
hitch,
what's the hitch?
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
They all look crazy, but Agatha's like, yeah, no, I'm not drinking that. She's the one and only that doesn't drink it. Again, not helping with just like how they perceive her, not helping with this trust factor, but ultimately this causes all of them to hallucinate, and they all see these really, really terrible visions that are constructed from their subconscious, from their imaginations. Lilia, she sees her younger self. Jen starts to hallucinate. That a doctor is forcing her to be underwater and ultimately drown. Alice sees her mother, who looks like she's about to commit suicide. And then Agatha, as we just noted, she ultimately does see a crib that looks like it's going to have a baby underneath the
Mm-hmm.
blanket, but it turns out it's the Darkhold. So these are all things associated with their pasts, with their trauma, with the things that they just have to live with on a day to day basis. And then the whole house is brought underwater. It's a crazy sequence. So much is happening. Lots is
Mm-hmm.
going down, but it just once again just shows them this is going to be tough, and this is just the first trial. Y'all have many more to go. So so don't get comfortable. And if you thought this was bad, wait until you see what comes next. So what were you thinking just seeing this whole thing unfold, knowing like, wow, this is really, really impactful stuff that's all tapping into fears and anxieties and real things that they deal with. But it's just kind of a requirement for what they have to do in order to walk the witch's road.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that episode of X-Men 97 where everybody's going through these visions in the house and you're like, what is going on? This is so dark. What is happening? But I really like the idea that they're kind of hammering home, I think, with these characters of like all of the witches that we know so far have been tormented to some kind. They all have this kind of trauma in which allows them to kind of practice their magic in a lot of ways. Not allow them, but like kind of led to the road and how they got here. I think that's a really interesting concept. Even Wanda, right, kind of losing her family is like another kind of example of that. And so it's interesting to see the different visions of these different characters because they give us more color into who these people are. We just met these people last episode. I'm like, okay, why are you here? Why is your mother like this? Why are you being drowned by this doctor? And now I feel like they've given us things to kind of harp on for the next couple episodes. They've established points of trauma to be like, okay, you remember when I had this vision back in this episode, this is why. And I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. So I really like that they decided to kind of go this route to kind of show us again how dark all of this stuff could be and how they're being haunted, I think, in their own ways. Because these, I will say, these aren't necessarily there's so many different kinds of witches, which we're learning, right? There are good witches, and then we definitely know there are bad witches, and there's some witches who exist in the middle. And I think seeing the witches that we're with and seeing where they are in that journey or in that level of morality in their witchdom or whatever is interesting. And so, man, what crazy dark way to get us there, but I liked it. I thought it was cool.
This was a really, really fun sequence in the episode. I liked it a lot. First and foremost, when Agatha, kind of the jig is up that she didn't drink the wine. They're all like, "What the fuck? Like you're bringing us on this journey. You want to walk this road, and you're not even going to participate." And then she tries to get Teen, to possibly drink it, but then
Hmm.
she's like, "No, no, no, don't do it." She drinks the wine. She's like, "Oh, it's the cheap stuff." That's really like fun stuff from her. But then when you see everything just going down, their faces are looking crazy. All of the
Hmm.
visions and manifestations come. It's all the inexplicable. It's all the stuff where it's like, whoa, okay, there's a lot of serious stuff here. X-Men 97 popped to mind. What also popped to mind was kind of the first time that we ever saw something like this in the MCU, all the way
Hmm.
back in Avengers Age of Ultron,
Yeah.
when Wanda put the hex on all of the Avengers, in order to distract them. And we saw those visions that they all dealt with, some of the things that they were insecure about or anxious about. That's kind of where any of that stuff started, before we really knew about the supernatural in the MCU. She was kind of the first one where it's like, oh wow, she can put hexes on people, and we're going back to that moment here where it's like, wow, okay, this can really make a person feel like they're unraveling.
Hmm.
On top of that, the house is crumbling, and I just love that they went completely practical with all this stuff. Like when the water comes into the house, like it's real. They really do that. It's really impressive how they pull it off, and then ultimately end up on the other side through this slide that takes them out back to the road. It was just cool visual stuff like that. I'm like, this looks good. I like what they're going for here. It's clear it's definitely on a soundstage, but that's okay. Like I kind of
Hmm.
expect that for just like the nature of the show and the fact that like this is a completely constructed and built world. But I thought all of that stuff was really, really impressively done. I liked it a lot. I guess as we wrap up here, the big thing that closed out the episode is the apparent death of Sharon, aka Mrs. Harper. It looks like she may not continue along this journey. I think we have pause and reason to believe that that might not be true. They can always reverse it and figure out a way to bring her back to life. But she
Hmm.
looks good and dead at the end of the episode, and Teen is the one who discovered it on the other side, and she looks pretty pale and gone there. And then the final moment, basically, once they say like, "Oh yeah, Sharon's dead," we get Agatha like, "Well, who's Sharon?" Because she knows her as Mrs. Hart, and so she's like,
Mrs.
"Who?"
Hart.
She's like, "Who the fuck is Sharon?"
Who's Sharon?
Again, reinforcing like you're a prick, Agatha. Like you are not, you're not a great person. You should know this woman's
She's
real
not.
name. But how'd you feel about seeing that? Like knowing that maybe at least what it appears to be is like the stakes are kind of here. The stakes are raised. Like this again, it's not safe. People can die. Like even though these are witches who can live prolonged lives, apparently it seems that they can be taken out if again they're not following the rules of what's happening along the road.
Yeah, I love having the higher stakes here, and it's such a dark way, I think, to show us the most naive and unknowing about this whole world was kind of the first one to die, and them not even realizing. I think that Mrs. Hart did drink the most wine. You know what I mean? She was in there going to town on that wine, and eventually that probably is what led her to her demise, for her to pass away in this moment. And they probably were there was so much happening and it was so fast. It's like these trials are serious, and they're kind of the show is kind of trying to tell us that. So man, I do like the idea of it being higher stakes. It just sucks and sad that Mrs. Hart, aka or Sharon, had to be the one, I think, to suffer from all of that. Also the foreshadowing there was crazy. If you remember, they walk in the house, she's like, oh my god, and they're like, what? Bury me in this kitchen. And that's where she dies. What? How did I did not think that's how that was going to go down at all, but that is exactly how it went down. And so again, there is possibility, like you said, for her to come back. Part of me is like, she's too good of a character. You know what I'm saying? Like her comedic relief is fire. Like she's one of my favorite people in the coven because she's the one that doesn't know what's going on here. And so it's weird because part of me is like, keep the stakes, don't let her come back. Another part of me is like, why had to be her? You know what I'm saying? It could have been one of the other witches. So we'll see what happens there. But either way, like you said, Agatha's not the best, and now they have to continue on without a whole nother witch as part of the coven.
Yeah, I do hope they stick with it because it would suck to see her go, but I think that that's just a testament to Deborah Jo Rupp and her performance as a character.
Yeah,
She
agreed.
she was beloved from WandaVision, and the fact that they brought her back in this capacity was like, oh, that's exciting, that's cool to go back to her as a character, and she is a comedic relief. Her timing is great, just all of that stuff is really really good energy and a really good dynamic in the midst of the serious stuff that's happening. But that's also more of a reason as to why it should
Hmm.
be like a permanent decision. Like, let's live with this. Let's let them know, like, okay, this is serious now. And I think that that's how you really, again, just like kind of reinforce the stakes of what's happening here. So we'll see what they do in next week's episode, but ultimately I do hope that they kind of, live with that decision and continue to move forward. Before we wrap up, any other key observations, any other notes, any other things you want to mention or point out about this week's episode of Agatha?
Not necessarily. Teen remains the biggest mystery of this whole show so far. We don't know who Teen is. There's so many theories out there, but who knows which one is true. I think I'm curious to see how that turns out and how Teen, who very obviously feels like is tied to potentially Agatha's son in some way. We just don't know how exactly, but I'm excited to see how that stuff turns out. But that's it.
Absolutely. Well, folks, those are all of our thoughts on episode 3 of the Marvel Studios and Disney Plus original series, Agatha All of Long. If you've checked this out, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.